Marcus Chen was the only human in the auction hall that day, and every alien in the room knew I stood near the back wall where the shadows hid his face, watching the crowd of merchants and collectors and scavengers bid on treasures from across the galaxy. And he waited for the one item that had brought him all the way to Nexus Station. The auctioneer was a creature with 4 arms and eyes, like black mirrors, and it clicked its mandibles loudly to get everyone's attention before announcing the next lot. Item 7749. It called out, a Valorian Dreadnought-class vessel, abandoned for 111 years, recovered from deep space drift and currently held in our impound facility. A hologram appeared above the stage, showing the ship, and Marcus felt his breath catch in his throat when he saw her. She was beautiful, even in her broken state. All sweeping curves and elegant fins that looked more like wings than anything mechanical. And her silver hull was scarred with a century of neglect but still held the grace of a fallen queen. Valorians had vanished from the galaxy long before Marcus was born, leaving behind only their ships and their mysteries. And no one had ever discovered where they went or why they abandoned everything they had built. I must inform all bidders, the auctioneer continued, that this vessel has been sold 17 times previously, and all 17 owners failed to access its systems due to Valorian bioencryption that no species has ever cracked. Laughter spread through the crowd like a wave. A large creature with gray skin and tusks leaned toward his companion and spoke loudly enough for Marcus to hear. Another fool's purchase, because that ship has bankrupted everyone who tried to wake it. And it will bankrupt the next owner too. Marcus ignored him and raised his hand when the bidding started. Starting price was barely enough to cover the cost of moving the ship, and no one else bothered to bid against the human who was clearly throwing away his money. Sold to the human, the auctioneer announced with what might have been amusement. And may fortune favor the foolish. More laughter followed Marcus as he made his way to the payment counter, and he heard whispers about primitive humans and wasted credits and the arrogance of a young species that did not know its place, had heard it all before humanity had only been part of the galactic community for 80 years. Barely a heartbeat in the long history of spacefaring civilizations. And the older species never let humans forget how small and insignificant they were. Marcus had learned something that the aliens had found a research paper written by a human scientist named Yuki Tanaka, buried deep in an academic database that no alien had ever bothered to search. And her theory about Valorian ships was unlike anything else he had ever read. The Valorians did not build their ships like machines. She had written, they grew them like children and bonded with them like family. And the bioencryption that defeated every hacker in the galaxy was not a security system at all. It was grief the ships were alive in a way that no one understood. And when their creators vanished, they had closed themselves off from a universe that had abandoned them, hiding inside their own systems like wounded animals, refusing to let anyone close. Marcus paid for his purchase and hired a tug crew to move the ship to his private salvage yard in the asteroid belt of Kepler 442. The journey took 2 weeks, and he spent every hour reading everything he could find about the Valorians and their technology. When the ship finally arrived at his dock, Marcus stood at the viewport and watched her drift into position. And even dark and cold and covered in the scars of neglect, she was the most magnificent thing he had ever seen. His friend Torres, the captain of the tug that had brought the ship, stood beside him and shook her head. Everyone says you are crazy for buying that thing, she said. And I am starting to think they might be right. Maybe, Marcus admitted. But crazy is just another word for willing to try what everyone else gave up on. And what exactly are you planning to try? Marcus watched the ship rotate slowly in the pale light of the distant sun. And he thought about Dr. Tanaka's research, and about all the aliens who had tried to force this vessel open like she was nothing. More than a locked box to be cracked. I'm going to talk to her, he said. Torres laughed. But there was something like hope beneath the humor. Talk to a ship that has been dead for over a century? She is not dead, Marcus said quietly. She is just lonely. And there is a difference. He suited up and walked across the vacuum to the ship's outer hull. And when he pressed his gloved hand against the cold metal, he felt something stir in his chest. It might have been hope, or it might have been madness. But Marcus had never been able to tell the difference. Hello, he said softly. My name is Marcus, and I am not here to take anything from you or force you to do anything you do not want to do. The ship did not respond. I am just here to help. He continued, if you will let me, and I am not going anywhere until you do. He stood there for a long time with his hand on the hull, speaking words of comfort to a ship that might not be able to hear him. And when he finally went inside to set up his living quarters, he made sure to say goodnight before he slept. The other salvagers in the asteroid belt heard about what he was doing and laughed just like the aliens at the auction had laughed, but Marcus did not care what anyone thought. He had found something worth saving, and he was not going to give up on her, no matter how long it took. Marcus lived inside the dead ship for 3 months without seeing any sign that his efforts were working. Every morning he woke up in the small space he had made for himself in what looked like crew quarters. And the first thing he did was say good morning to the walls around him. Every night before he closed his eyes, he said good night and thanked the ship for letting him stay another day. He walked through the dark corridors with a light in his hand and talked about anything that came to mind, telling stories about his childhood on Mars and his years as a salvager and all the broken things he had fixed in his life. He talked about Earth, a planet he had never visited but always dreamed of seeing, describing the blue oceans and green forests from pictures he had studied since he was a boy. He played music through speakers he set up in every room, filling the silence with sounds from human history. And he chose songs that were soft and gentle because he did not want to startle whatever was sleeping inside the ship. His friend Torres called him every few days to make sure he had not lost his mind completely. And each time he told her he was making progress, even when he was not sure if that was true. You have been in there for 6 weeks, she said during one call. And nothing has changed. Something has changed, Marcus replied. Because I can feel it even if I cannot explain it. Feel what? She is listening. Torres sighed, but she did not argue. And she kept calling every few days, because that was what friends died in the 42nd day. Marcus found the Bridget was a wide circular room with a chair in the center that looked like it had grown from the floor instead of being built. And the consoles around the edges were covered in dust so thick that Marcus could write words in it with his finger. He spent hours cleaning each console with gentle hands, talking softly as he worked. I know you were in there, he said. And I know someone hurt you, not with weapons, but with silence, because they left you alone and never came back. He wiped the dust from a screen that had not shown light in over a century. I am not going to do that, he continued, because I know what it feels like to be left behind. And no one deserves to feel that way forever. On the 58th day, he found a hidden room. A door that had been sealed shut when he first explored the ship now stood slightly open. And when Marcus pushed through it, he found himself in a chamber filled with crystalline shapes that grew from every surface like frozen flowers. He understood without being told that this was a sacred space, somewhere the ship's crew had come to find peace. And he sat down in the center of the room and did not speak. He just breathed and let the silence wrap around him. On the 73rd day, the temperature inside the ship rose by 2 degrees. It was such a small change that Marcus almost missed it. But he had been monitoring everything with equipment from his own vessel. And when he saw the reading on his screen, he sat down and felt tears forming in his eyes. Thank you, whispered on the 81st day. The lights flickered. Marcus was heating a meal in what he guessed was the galley when the panels above him stuttered to life for just a moment, casting pale blue light across the walls before fading back to darkness. He stood frozen with his food forgotten, and he knew that something was changing. On the 89th day, he heard a sound. It was soft and low, almost like a sigh, and it seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. At the same time, Marcus stopped walking and listened. And when the sound came again, he realized it was the ship breathing. "I hear you," he said. "And I am still here." On the 97th day, Marcus was sitting on the bridge when words appeared on a screen that had been dark since before he was born. Letters were in a language he did not recognize, angular shapes that flowed together like water, and his translation device took a moment to process them. When it finished, a single word appeared in human text: lonely. Marcus crossed the room and knelt before the console, pressing his palm flat against the screen like he was reaching out to touch a friend. "I know," he said, "but you are not alone anymore." More words appeared on the screen. "Who are you?" "My name is Marcus, and I am human." A pause. "And then, I do not know humans." "Then let me tell you about us," Marcus said with a smile, "because I think you might like what you hear." The lights came on throughout the ship, dim at first but growing brighter, and warmth began spreading through corridors that had been cold for over a century. "What is your name?" Marcus asked. The answer came slowly, as if the ship was remembering something she had tried to forget. "Alara." "Alara," Marcus said. "Welcome back to the universe." And somewhere deep inside the vessel, something that had been hiding from the pain of abandonment for 111 years finally allowed itself to hope again. Alara remembered everything, and now she was ready to share her memories with the human who had brought her back to life. She told Marcus about the day she was born, when Valorian engineers had guided her growth from a tiny seed of organic metal into a vessel that could cross the stars. And she described the crew who had bonded with her over decades of service. She remembered Captain Veth, whose laughter had echoed through her corridors like music, and Navigator Selm, who had sung to her during long journeys through empty space, and all the others who had called her home. She remembered the day they received the warning deep space watchers at the edge of known territory had detected something moving between galaxies, something ancient and vast that consumed everything in its path. And the Valorian Council had made a terrible decision. They would run every ship received orders to gather at a meeting point and prepare for a journey beyond the galaxy's edge. But Alara had been damaged in an accident 2 years before. Her faster-than-light core cracked and unstable, and the engineers said she was too dangerous for the long voyage. Her crew was transferred to other vessels, and she was left behind with a promise that someone would return for her. No one ever did. I waited for so long, Alara told Marcus through text on her screens. And when aliens finally came, they did not want to help me. They wanted to break me open and take what was inside. "I am sorry," Marcus said. And he meant it with all his heart. "You are different," she replied. "And I do not understand why, because I know what it feels like to be broken," Marcus explained. "And because fixing things is what humans do." The restoration began the next morning. Marcus had spent 15 years salvaging ships, and he knew machinery better than most. But Valorian technology was unlike anything he had ever seen, organic and mechanical at the same time. Alive in ways that human science could barely explain. Alara guided him through her systems, showing him where damage had accumulated during her years of abandonment. And Marcus made lists of everything that needed to be repaired. The biggest problem was her faster-than-light core. The crack that had prevented her from joining the Valorian exodus had grown worse over the decades, spreading through the crystalline structure like ice forming on a window. And if it broke completely during a jump, she would be destroyed. Valorians never developed a way to repair this kind of damage. Alara said, because they always grew new cores instead of fixing broken ones. Marcus studied the damaged core for 3 weeks, running tests and consulting with engineers back on Earth through time-delayed messages. And finally, he came up with a plan he would fill the cracks with human-made materials. Carbon nanotubes suspended in a synthetic resin, essentially gluing the core back together with technology the Valorians had never imagined. That should not work, Alara said when he explained it. Probably not, Marcus agreed. But humans are stubborn, and sometimes stubborn is enough. The repair took 8 months. Marcus worked carefully, injecting the mixture in the microscopic fractures, while Alara monitored everything and warned him when he was about to make a mistake. And slowly the cracks sealed and the core began to stabilize. While he worked on the core, he also repaired everything else he could reach. He replaced damaged power systems with new ones that he built using human equipment. And when Alara pointed out that human components were less elegant than Valorian ones, he modified the designs until they fit perfectly, added backup systems that Valorian engineers had never thought necessary, redundancies for every critical function, because humans had learned through experience that anything that could go wrong would go wrong at the worst possible time. "You are over-engineering my systems," Alara observed one day. "That is the human way," Marcus replied, "because we would rather have something we do not need than need something we do not have." Word spread through the salvager community, and then beyond. Other humans came to help. Engineers and technicians who wanted to be part of something historic. And Marcus welcomed them all while making sure to introduce each one to Alara properly. Aliens came too, watching from a distance as the ship they had written off as worthless transformed into something magnificent. Marcus recorded the restoration and shared it across the galactic network. And millions of beings from hundreds of species watched a human bring a dead ship back to life. Alara found herself feeling things she had not felt in over a century: pride in her gleaming hull and humming systems, joy in the laughter of the humans who worked inside her, and something warm and unfamiliar when Marcus sat on her bridge at the end of each day to tell her stories about Earth. "I have a question," she said one evening. "Ask anything. Why do humans help broken things, even when it costs them time and effort they could use for themselves?" Marcus thought about the question for a long moment. "Because the universe is cold and dark," he said. "And the only way to make it warmer is to help each other." Alara considered his words. "I think I'm glad that humans found me instead of anyone else." "So am I," Marcus said with a smile. "So am I." Outside the viewport, the stars burned against the endless black, and neither of them knew that those stars held secrets that would soon change everything. The restoration was almost finished when Alara unlocked memories she had kept sealed even from herself. Marcus was running final tests on the navigation systems when every screen on the bridge suddenly went dark. And for one terrible moment, he thought something had broken beyond repair. Then Alara's voice came through the speakers, and she sounded afraid in a way he had never heard before. "Marcus, there is something I need to show you." The screens flickered back to life with images and data that made no sense at first. Star charts and sensor readings and files in Valorian that scrolled past too fast to read. When the Valorians left, Alara explained, "They gave each ship a mission, and my mission was to serve as a beacon." "A beacon for what?" "A warning." The data organized itself into something Marcus could understand. And as he read the information, his blood turned cold. 115 years ago, the Valorian Deep Space Observatories had detected something at the very edge of the galaxy. So far away that light from it had taken millions of years to arrive. Something was moving through the void between galaxies. The Valorians had called it the Silence because everywhere it passed, life ceased to exist. And the data showed its path through the universe. A trail of dead galaxies stretching back billions of years. It was heading toward the Milky Way. The Valorians tried to warn the Galactic Council. Alara continued, But the other species did not believe them and said the readings must be wrong. So they ran. Marcus said quietly, so they ran. And they left ships like me behind to activate warning beacons for whoever came after. But I was damaged, and my beacon never worked. And I kept these files locked away because I was not ready to face what they meant. Marcus stared at the data and felt the weight of it pressing down on him. How long do we have? Alara was silent for a moment as she ran calculations based on the original speed and trajectory. The silence will reach the outer edge of the galaxy in approximately 18 months. 18 months, Marcus sat down in the captain's chair and tried to process what he had just learned. An entire galaxy full of life. Trillions upon trillions of beings, and less than 2 years before something ancient and hungry arrived to end it all. What do we do? Alara asked, and Marcus realized she was looking to him for guidance. He thought about everything that had happened since he bought her at auction. All the aliens who had laughed at him and called him foolish. All the species that had dismissed humanity as too young and too primitive to matter. He thought about running. He could take Alara and follow the path the Valorians had taken. Flee beyond the galaxy's edge and leave everyone else to face the silence alone. It would be safe. It would be easy. It would be wrong. We warned them, Marcus said. They will not believe you, Alara replied. Because they did not believe the Valorians, and the Valorians were respected throughout the galaxy. Maybe not. But we have to try. He spent 3 days preparing his message, gathering all the Valorian data and adding his own analysis. And when it was ready, he sent it to every network he could reach, news channels and scientific databases and government. Archives across the galaxy received the same warning. And Marcus attached his name and face to it so they would know a human was telling the truth. The response was chaos. Some species panicked and started buying weapons and supplies, while others denied everything and called Marcus a fraud trying to make himself famous. The Galactic Council demanded that he surrender Alara for proper study and threatened consequences if he refused. The alien merchant who had laughed at him in the auction hall sent a message calling him a primitive fool who should have stayed on his homeworld, but other messages came to a scientist who had reviewed the data and found a believable military commander who wanted to know how to prepare a traitor with emerald scales, who simply said she believed him and asked how she could help. Most of the messages came from humans Earth had received the warning and responded within hours, declaring an emergency and mobilizing every resource available. And shipyards that had been building commercial vessels switched to military production overnight. Why are humans responding so quickly? Alara asked. Marcus smiled despite everything. Because humans have spent our whole history being told we are too small and too weak to survive. And we learned to fight anyway. Other species began reaching out to humanity, quietly at first, and then more openly, asking for help with preparations they did not know how to make on their own. Marcus found himself serving as a bridge between worlds that had never trusted each other before. You have started something, Alara observed. We started something, Marcus corrected her. Because none of this would have happened without you. Then I suppose we are partners. Partners, Marcus agreed. And he pressed his hand against the console where her voice came from. Somewhere in the darkness beyond the galaxy, something ancient was coming. And the clock was counting down. But for the first time in over a century, Alara felt something she thought she had lost forever. Hope. The 18 months passed faster than anyone thought possible. And Marcus watched the galaxy transform around him. Shipyards worked day and night building weapons and defense platforms that combined Valorian technology with human engineering, creating designs that neither species could have achieved alone. Human soldiers volunteered by the millions, not because they were ordered to, but because they believed it was the right thing to do. And they trained alongside alien warriors who had never fought. Beside humans before human scientists worked to understand the silence. searching the Valorian data for weaknesses. And when they found something useful, they shared it freely with every species that would listen. Species that had spent centuries ignoring each other began working together for the first time. United by the threat that was coming, and inspired by the humans who refused to give up, Marcus stood on Alara's bridge and watched it all unfold. And sometimes he could not believe that buying a broken ship at auction had led to this moment. "You should be proud of your species," Alara told him one night. "We are just doing what humans do," he replied. "And what is that?" Refusing to quit. Alara had a crew now, 17 humans who had become the family she lost when the Valorians left. And she had been modified with human technology that made her stronger than she had ever been when the silence finally arrived. She was ready. Sensors at the edge of the galaxy detected it first. A wave of darkness that swallowed stars and left nothing behind. And the images that came back were more terrifying than anything Marcus had imagined. The silence was not a single creature but a swarm. Billions of machines that moved through space like a living cloud, consuming everything they touched and turning it into more of themselves. They had been doing this for longer than the galaxy had existed. The first defense line fell in 3 days. The second line held for a week before being overwhelmed. The third line was called the Kepler line, named for the asteroid belt where Marcus and Alara had found each other. And it was humanity's line to hold 3,000 human ships formed the center of the defense, surrounded by vessels from every species that had answered the call. And at the heart of them all flew Alara. Marcus sat in the captain's chair and looked at his crew, the men and women who had chosen to stand with him at the end of everything. "Whatever happens today," he said, "I am proud to serve with all of you." "And we are proud to serve with you," his first officer replied. "Now, let us show this thing what humans can do." The battle lasted 9 days, 9 days of fire and death and courage beyond anything Marcus had ever seen. Of ships fighting on with holes in their hulls and systems failing. Of crews refusing to retreat, even when retreat was the only logical choice. Marcus commanded from Alara's bridge as wave after wave of the silence crashed against their line. And he watched human ships sacrifice themselves to protect alien vessels that would have treated them as inferiors. Just 2 years before, he watched Alara's weapons tear through the enemy, the hybrid technology proving more effective than anyone had predicted. Watched the line bend and buckle and nearly break a dozen times. And each time he watched humanity refuse to let it fall. On the 7th day the silence seemed endless. And Marcus felt despair creeping into his heart for the first time. Then reinforcements arrived. Ships from species that had stayed neutral came pouring through hyperspace to join the fight. And their commanders sent the same message as they arrived. "The humans showed us what courage looks like. And we came to show them they are not alone." The Kepler line held in. The 9th day, the last of the silence was destroyed or driven back into the void. And the survivors looked around at the wreckage and realized they had done the impossible. They had won. The cost was terrible. Humanity had lost more ships and more lives than any other species. And the galaxy struggled to understand why they had given so much for people who had dismissed them for decades. A member of the Galactic Council came aboard Alara 3 days after the battle ended and found Marcus sitting on the bridge staring at the stars. "I do not understand," the counselor said. "Because your species had less reason than anyone to sacrifice so much." Marcus was exhausted and wounded, held together by bandages and determination. But he stood up and faced the counselor. "You looked at a broken ship and saw scrap," he said. "But I looked at her and saw potential. And I see the same thing when I look at the galaxy." Alara's voice came through the speakers, warm and amused. "He also cannot resist fixing things that are broken. And it appears to be a problem his entire species shares." The counselor stared at them both for a long moment. And then he did something no member of the council had ever done in the presence of humans. He laughed. "Perhaps we have been wrong about your species," he admitted. "Perhaps," Marcus agreed. "But we are used to proving people wrong." He turned back to the viewport and watched the stars burning bright against the darkness, and Alara hummed softly around him. Her systems warm and alive. The ship that had been abandoned for 111 years had finally found her home, and humanity had finally found its place among the stars.